Hey baseball player, in this video, I'm going to teach you exactly what you need to do in order to take your baseball specific conditioning to the next level. How we're going to approach this is go through some of the most important baseball conditioning specific qualities that you need to have in order to have the most well-rounded approach to your training as possible. It all starts with the physiology behind conditioning, and that is making your workouts energy system specific. Energy system physiology can get incredibly in-depth and complicated with many different chemical pathways and things to remember, but long story put very short, there are only three energy systems you need to be concerned with: the aerobic, the lactic, and the alactic. Your aerobic is responsible for low intensity, long duration type movements. Think like running a marathon or just going out for a long jog. Whereas the lactic system, this is responsible for very high intensity movements, but in the duration of 60 to 90 seconds per physical exertion. So think like sprinting for a 400 or 800 meter sprint. Whereas finally, we have the alactic system, which is responsible for the highest possible intensity outputs that we can produce. So explosive jumping, explosive sprinting for less than 50 meters or 50 yards at a time. It's responsible for intense bouts of physical activity, really 10 seconds or less, and in a lot of cases, a lot less. So we have our alactic, which is extremely explosive. We have our lactic, which is high intensity, but a little bit longer duration. And then we have our aerobic, which is very long duration, low intensity. These different energy systems give our muscles different types of energy substrates that they can use to feed this activity. So we're gonna burn a lot more body fat doing aerobic work per unit of physical activity exerted. Whereas with lactic and alactic, our lactic, we're going to be relying very much on carbohydrates, whereas alactic is going to be very dependent upon creatine and carbohydrates. Now, why did I go through all that for you? Because baseball is an alactic aerobic sport. It's a mixed energy system demand sport because it is performed through high intensity bouts of physical exertion, but interspersed with very low intensity bouts of physical exertion. Think just hitting a ball and sprinting to first base, right? That is the highest possible velocity. You could hit the ball as hard as you could, and then you sprinted as fast as you could. But then what? You kind of stand there, you wait for the next guy to go up to bat, you might relax, you might jump around a little bit, you might shift your weight. Extremely low intensity activity. Or let's say you even hit a home run, you go all the way around the diamond, but then what? You kind of walk to the dugout, you hang out, you don't do much until your next time you're in there. Or if you're even in the outfield, if you're in the outfield, you might stand around for a long time before a ball finally comes your way. This is high intensity bouts of physical exertion interspersed with low intensity bouts. So baseball players need to really maximize alactic and aerobic components of their training if they want actual baseball specific conditioning. Yet you're going to see baseball players sprint 400 meters or sprint 800 meters or do nonstop suicide runs. They're going to do things that are lactic. And although that's hard work, it's not going to have the transfer over to baseball conditioning that you think it's going to have. And that's one big mistake baseball players make. Another big mistake that they make is too much aerobic work. Right? Aerobic work, a lot of baseball players, they'll want to increase their cardio or conditioning, so they just kind of jog around their neighborhood. Jog around the block, maybe they jog around the field that they play at, 10 times and call that a conditioning workout. Not really, because then you can become aerobically dominant. And baseball is not an aerobic sport. It's an alactic aerobic sport. And I think it's pretty easy to make the argument that it's more important to have a very strong alactic component, because that's what's going to govern your ability to have explosive speed and be able to maintain those explosive outputs for all the innings of the game. It's going to be what you'll use to jump to catch a ball. It's going to be what you use to swing the bat as hard as possible. So ensuring you have a balance in your baseball conditioning program design between alactic and aerobic is critical behind actually getting a baseball specific result, okay? Conditioning is not just about hard work. It's about allocating that hard work into the most intelligent areas that are actually going to get you a baseball specific result, right? That's the difference between training and exercise. Training gets you better at baseball, whereas exercise just burns more calories. So very important to be energy system specific. Next is body composition. This is something that is a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about, but it's just a simple reality that if you want to have optimal conditioning, you got to be lean. Period. You can't contract body fat like you can contract muscle tissue. Body fat is something that will hold your conditioning back because it's nothing more than just carrying a backpack of weight plates around with you all day, right? If you lost 25 pounds of weight that was a kind of useless weight on you, you could really think about it like taking a backpack with a 25-pound weight plate on it and just taking it off. You know, which one, how are you going to be able, how far are you going to be able to run with the 25-pound weight in your back or with it not in your back? It's very simple. You use more energy if you are heavier than you should be, and your energy is going to run out. You could think about it kind of like a video game. Every video game's got that green bar of health. Well, someone who's carrying, say, 50 pounds of extra weight, they've got the same amount of energy at the beginning of a game as somebody who's lean, the same amount of energy, but the person who's carrying too much weight, they're going to run out of that energy a lot sooner than the lean person, because the lean person is being much more energy efficient because they're not carrying around as much body weight. So body composition is very critical. You don't have to be as lean as a bodybuilder or anything like that, but you should be lean. Right? Males should ideally be less than 15% body fat, and females should ideally be less than 24% body fat. If you can stay in those ranges, then you're going to be doing a big favor for yourself for conditioning. And if you're outside of those ranges, then that's probably the easiest and fastest way you can improve your conditioning, because a simple change in your diet is going to allow for improvements in body composition, and then that's immediately going to improve your conditioning independent of what training you're doing. No matter what else you're doing, you're going to be getting rid of that weight plate, so you're going to be able to move better for a longer period of time. So body composition, hugely important component towards conditioning because you simply burn a lot less energy doing the same thing. Next is functional muscle tissue. So this is kind of the reverse, where body composition, I was talking about getting a lot leaner. Functional muscle tissue is for the baseball athletes out there who want to gain weight. Now, baseball, you've got to be strong. You've got to have muscle. You've got to look like an athlete. There's definitely a point of diminishing returns. Again, you don't need to look like a bodybuilder in order to be a baseball player, but you should have some muscle on you because that's really going to help you improve your speed, your conditioning, your hitting power, your throwing power, everything. It's going to help with everything when you get an athletic amount of muscle. But if you are very skinny and then you want to go on a bulking period and put on a bunch of muscle mass, it's important that that muscle mass is functional muscle mass, because if I'm right now, let's say I'm 130 pounds and I want to build muscle tissue and my conditioning is great at 130 pounds. Okay, cool. But then a coach tells me, hey, you need to be 170 pounds. So go ahead and put on some muscle mass and stop the cardio because that's something that's going to decrease your ability to build muscle. And then I'm the player. I say, okay, coach, I'll get to 170. So I go on a big bulking program, bulking diet. I'm lifting weights in the gym, and maybe a year passes, and I'm 170 or whatever. People make gains at different rates. Some time passes, and now I'm 170. Well, a big key asterisk factor that I just said there was I stopped doing my cardio and my conditioning because coach told me so, because it wasn't going to support my weight gain. Here's the thing. You can actually build, for lack of a better phrase, dumb muscle. because muscle adapts to what you expose it to most. And if you're exposed to endurance work, your muscle builds a lot of something known as mitochondria. And this mitochondrial density is what is actually the factory that provides the fuel for all this energy system specific stuff. Your mitochondria will adapt to a muscle that needs alactic output. Your mitochondria will adapt to a muscle that needs aerobic output. So essentially, whatever you expose your muscle to from a conditioning perspective, your mitochondria is going to adapt and say, okay, well, this guy, he is really working on alactic work, so I'm going to make sure that that's very efficient in this muscle. He's working on a lot of aerobic stuff, so I'm going to make sure that that's very efficient. So then you kind of build what you can really categorize as baseball muscle. But if I drop all of my conditioning and all of my cardio and all of that work, and I just start doing a bodybuilding program, well, now I have the muscle size, but I don't have the conditioning to support that muscle size. You could think about it like a big muscle, but without all of that important mitochondria that allows you to actually be heavily conditioned with that muscle. Or to put it very simple, you've got a lot of muscle, but you don't got the hustle. Baseball players need the muscle and the hustle. So during even a mass-up phase, even if you want to build 40 pounds of muscle, right? That'd be enormous. Even if you want to do that, you got to do conditioning and cardio the whole way through. You got to make sure that the muscle that you're building is functional baseball muscle. Got it? That's a big one that a lot of people miss. Next is mobility. Mobility is critical for baseball conditioning because if you're not mobile, you're not moving efficiently. And if you're not moving efficiently, then you're not energy efficient, right? Everybody knows an athlete who just moves like water. They move fluidly no matter what they're doing, and everything looks very efficient and flow-like. Whereas if I'm immobile and I'm moving all herky-jerky and I'm doing these weird things, then I'm not efficient with my movement, so I'm burning more energy per unit of movement, and therefore I'm going to get a lot more tired than I otherwise would have been had I been able to move properly like an athlete. Moving properly isn't just about getting the most out of what you're doing. It's about being efficient with the actual energy systems that you're using. You use less energy and you're able to do more. And a lot of that comes down to mobility. And mobility is actually what allows you to move like an athlete. Because if you're strong, if you're powerful, if you're super lean, if you've got muscle tissue, none of this stuff really matters if you can't move like an athlete. If you don't have baseball-specific mobility, if you don't have baseball athletic movement, you need all of that stuff to be able to unlock your conditioning, because you will only ever unlock your conditioning if you're moving as efficiently as possible. And that comes from mobility. Last but not least, speed reserve. So I did a video previously for you guys on how to improve your baseball speed, but one thing I wanted to save for this video was actually a principle of program design, and it's known as the principle of speed reserve. Now, speed is different than conditioning, but you can kind of see how they feed into each other, because if I'm a lot faster than my opponent, then I don't have to operate at the same percentages of effort to move as fast as him. So, for example, and this is where conditioning comes into play. If I have a max level of speed that's here, and you have a max level of speed that's here, well, now I can actually move as fast as you, but at about 50% of the effort that you're putting in, because you're working at 100% of your ability to move as fast as possible. I have a capability to move this fast, but to match your speed, I only have to work 50% as hard. Now, who's going to get tired faster? The one who's moving at 100% of their ability, or the person who's moving at 50% of their ability? 50% is absolutely nothing, whereas the 100% guy, he's going to be exhausted in a very short period of time. So even though speed and conditioning are two different things, your speed reserve is known as the gap between, say, someone else's 100% and your 100%. You've got this much speed reserve in place, and that allows you to be a lot more conditioned. So one way to improve your conditioning is to take your speed to the next level with speed-specific workouts. They really feed into each other because speed reserve gives you conditioning, but then conditioning allows you to be able to repeat your high level of speed throughout a game, because it doesn't really matter how fast you are if you're only good for one run. It just really doesn't matter. You need to have both, and they both feed each other, but they are trained differently. So speed, great way to improve your conditioning due to the principle of speed reserve. Now, with this list, I want you to assess yourself with self-awareness and self-honesty and be able to identify, hey, what's the weakest thing that I am currently at right now? Where's the weakest link in my chain? Because the most important thing that you need to focus on is what's going to be unique to you. There are no umbrella principles when it comes to program design. I can't say, okay, do this one thing and 100% of people listening right now are going to benefit from it. That might be true in a general sense, but in order to create the biggest impact on a baseball player, you need to identify where you're weakest at. Have you been bulking and building dumb muscle instead of baseball muscle? Could you get a little bit leaner right now? Are you on a baseball-specific conditioning program, or are you kind of just sprinting and running based on how you feel that day and, what other people are doing around you? Do you do mobility work every week to optimize your baseball conditioning, but also to prevent the most common baseball injuries? And are you doing speed training so that you have a better speed reserve than everybody else out in the field? Assess where you're at, pick your weakest link, and focus on that in your next training phase, and your baseball conditioning will be taken to the next level. Thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you smash that thumbs up button and subscribe to the Baseball Training channel. And for all the information you're ever going to need on how to become a better baseball player, go to baseballtraining.com.